Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today, by very popular demand, we're reviewing every single studio album from the one and only Gojira. I've kind of been wanting to make this video for a while. I have floated this question in the past, and, the answer has kind of always been yes. But this time around, it's been super yes. And this time around, I didn't, throw in other options and categories, like reviewing every Cannibal Corpse album, or reviewing every Mayhem album, or something like that, which in the past were chosen over reviewing every Gojira album, at least in the polls that I have made on the community tab of this channel. And now we're doing it! Hell yes! Let's talk about every single studio album from French progressive death metal groove metal band Gojira. Just a reminder, as with every single reviewing every album style video that we do on the Metal Meltdown, we are going to talk about each album in order of release, assigning each a score out of 5, and, we're not going to talk about EPs, or demos, or live albums, or compilations, or solo projects, or side projects, or anything like that. We are looking specifically at Gojira and their 7 studio albums. The first of which being Terra Incognita, released March 18th, 2001, via Gabriel Editions. Now, right off the bat, I gotta say, a much different beast in comparison to nearly everything else that Gojira has put out since the release of this album. Sonically, it is much more brutal, with some of the usual things that we know to expect from Gojira, some of the guitar tones and some of those weird arrangements and passages and rhythmic bursts and such, but also a lot more influence from late 90s tech death and brutal death metal, some kind of blackened death metal style explosive bursts, a lot of blast beats, and a lot of really muscular, demented riffery, a lot of screaming, a lot of really dark lyricism. It was written solely by Joe Duplantis in complete isolation. He moved away from society. He moved to a cabin that he built in the middle of nowhere, a cabin that he built by himself. He lived in it with his girlfriend with no electricity, no income for 2 years. He basically just vibed in the forest and wrote this album. This experience is explicitly referenced in the song Love. The song 04 as well was written as a 50th birthday present for Joe and Mario Duplantis' mother. In fact, it even samples a voicemail left by their uncle in the very beginning. It's twisted, it's brutal, it's unpredictable, and it's awesome, honestly. Clone, Lizard Skin, Satan is a Lawyer, the aforementioned 04, Deliverance, Space Time, Rise. So many great riffs, so many great ideas, so many weird time changes and so many weird flavors and spices, and it's all so well done. You have these really extreme kind of blackened death metal bursts, you have these almost kind of pummeling mathcore rhythms, you have some more grungy tones, Satan is a Lawyer in particular for a bit, almost kind of unfolds like a heavier Korn song before eventually evolving into something on par with what I expect from Behemoth at that time. Or maybe even Lamb of God with some of those really tight, snappy, crunchy grooves. I mean, it's just really fucking heavy and cool and gnarly. In the Forest closes out this album in, dare I say, schizophrenic fashion with the kind of guitar wizardry and the kind of sharp, precise musicianship I would honestly expect of And Justice for All era Metallica, but filtered through some really sharp, raw, technical death metal. It's just a great album, severely underrated in my opinion. Strong 4 out of 5. Holy shit. I mean, I guess if you're more familiar with modern Gojira, records like Magma and Fortitude, this would probably be a little overwhelming. This might be a bit too much to handle, but goddamn, I love it. I think it's fucking great. I think more people need to check this bad boy out. Next up, we have The Link, released April 18th, 2003 via Boycott. More or less a continuation of what we heard on Terra Incognita. Very sharp, very precise, very brutal, very crazed and manic and extreme. It's definitely not as brutal or as pulverizing. In retrospect, you can visibly see that kind of transition that Gojira are making from the more death metal-oriented sounds of Terra Incognita to the more groove and prog metal sounds of From Mars to Sirius and The Way of All Flesh. But it's still reasonably brutal and pulverizing, you know? Like, it's still dark, it's still fucked up, and, you know, again, it's a transitional record, so you're also starting to see some of the elements that would appear on future records, you know? The lyrics do feel a little bit more aware of the world around them. They're more environmentally, socially, and politically conscious to an extent. It's a little more introspective at the same time, like Gojira are really evolving as songwriters. And of course, as a result, there are quite a few gnarly jams. Death of Me, Remembrance, Indians, all great bangin' tunes. What holds this record back for me is the somewhat unremarkable and awkward mixing and mastering. The production here is not great. The drums have this weird, loud, kind of tinny feel and vibe to them. I'm not really getting a lot of bass. Everything feels kind of muzzled, and it's just kind of a cluttered and clumsy record, sonically speaking. It lacks the cohesion, the clarity, the transparency of future records, and it can't even make up for it by being, as we said before, as brutal or as pulverizing as something like Terra Incognito. I've heard people call this kind of the black sheep of Gojira's discography, and I can kind of see why. It's a pretty imperfect record. Not terrible, like I'd still give it a solid 3.5 out of 5, but I don't think I would recommend this above a lot of the other stuff Gojira has done, you know? This is closer to the bottom of the totem pole, I suppose. But still a solid album, you know? Still some good ideas, still some good songs. Check it out. It's not terrible. It's just not as great as everything else they've done. It's still a really good album, all things considered. Next up, we have From Mars to Sirius, released September 27th, 2005, via Prosthetic Records and Listenable Records. And do I even need to say it? This is the band's best album. Duh. Period. It's the best album they've ever made. They're most ambitious, they're most powerful, they're most provocative, they're most urgent, they're most important. It is one of the best metal albums of the 2000s and probably one of the best prog metal records ever made. It's fucking incredible. It's fucking fantastic. A concept album dealing directly with environmental issues, the death of planet Earth, some kind of weird cosmic time travel shit, and also whales? Climate change, marine life, war, death, life, peace, rebirth, Gojira, at their best, doing their best, kicking ass. This album, lyrically and conceptually, has proven to be timeless. Like, everything that this album tackles and deals with and confronts remains scarily relevant years later, arguably more so than ever before. But perhaps most importantly, the music just kicks boatloads of ass. Like, I challenge a motherfucker not to throw down, even during their most introspective and concept and artsy-fartsy moments, to stuff like Backbone and Ocean Planet, the heaviest matter in the universe, Flying Whales, Global Warming. The production is amazing. It feels immense and massive and cinematic without being, like, really overwhelming, without being really obnoxious or overblown. So many great screamed vocal harmonies making for these really anthemic choruses, so many amazing crunchy grooves and riffs. You know, that guitar tone is just, mwah, chef's kiss, excellent. Honestly, strong 5 out of 5 for me. I love this record. I honestly think it's perfect. I honestly think it's a masterpiece. Like, it's just so good. It's so good! Oh my god, it's so good. It's perfect. It's incredible. If you have yet to jam this album, you need to change that immediately. If there's only one Gojira album you listen to for the rest of your life, it better be this. And if it isn't, you need to change that immediately. This is not up for debate. Go do it. I command you. Next up, we have The Way of All Flesh, released October 13th, 2008, via Prosthetic Records and Listenable Records once again. I recently purchased this album on vinyl. I recently talked about it in a vinyl update video, and I said if this album is not my favorite Gojira album, if it's not at the very top, then it's pretty damn near close to the top. And that is true. I mean, it's not my favorite Gojira album, duh, as we just demonstrated. But it's damn near close to the top. It might be number 2 at the very least number 3, but probably number 2. Similarly to From Mars to Sirius, it deals with a lot of environmental issues. I mean, Toxic Garbage Island, duh. But this album more specifically deals with Gojira's, and everyone in Gojira's, their respective ideas and concepts of what death and the afterlife are and what they're all about. There's a lot of philosophical battles on this album. It's definitely a more spiritual and emotive album in that regard, and you can really feel that through a lot of the music, even if you weren't actively paying attention to the lyrics and the concept. Like, you can really feel that, especially in something like Ouroboros, which has all of these winding guitar riffs and harmonies and licks alongside these really demanding, howling vocals. Randy Blythe makes an appearance on Adoration for None and absolutely knocks it out of the park. There's also The Art of Dying, A Sight to Behold, All the Tears, all great numbers. The closing number and title track, The Way of All Flesh, could do with a little bit of trimming, and that probably holds this back from being a 5 out of 5 like From Mars to Sirius. But, I mean, it's still a really interesting track. I really love how it just immerses you in its waves of, like, cosmic progressive death metal, and I do like how, as it officially closes out, it does so on a very anxious and nervous and kind of bittersweet note, with a lot of droning and these, like, cathartic, minimalistic jams that bring to mind, like, Sun. Solid 4.5 out of 5 for me, a truly incredible record. I mean, Gojira just knocking it out of the goddamn park. Not that that's a surprise. Gojira, they're a pretty fucking consistent band, but, like, my god, this is amazing. This is everything you want a follow-up to a great album to be. Like, Gojira didn't try to redo From Mars to Sirius. Any other band in their position probably would have, but, like, they didn't. They just kind of expanded on a few ideas, and they took that into new directions, new ideas, new topics, new concepts. They made it feel like something brand new and exciting all over again. Extremely well done. Next up, we have L'Enfant Sauvage, released June 26th, 2012, via Roadrunner Records. And this was actually the first Gojira record I ever listened to. You'd think for that reason I would have a bit of a nostalgic attachment to this album, but I don't, because I actually think this might be their weakest album. Still like a good album, all things considered. Like, it's not horrible, but yeah, it's not great in my opinion. It does have great things about it, though. Like, the production on this thing is amazing. I love how savage and almost animalistic this album feels. Like, some really amazing, intense performances, leading to some really intense and amazing songs. Like Explosia, the title track, The Axe, Liquid Fire, all great shit. My problem is, honestly, after these 4 tracks, after basically the first 5 or 6 tracks, the album just kind of doesn't do much for me. It feels very heavy-handed, and I don't really feel like it's as expressive or as wild or as unpredictable as other records. It doesn't have as many tricks up its sleeve. The songs individually are fine, like Mouth of Kala, Born in Winter. Like, again, nothing, like, terrible here, but I don't know, something about the flow of this thing, something about it. It just kind of feels incohesive. The first half is just so much stronger, in my opinion, than the second half. It's not as consistent. It's not as fluid. Like, even when I was 18, when this album came out, I kind of felt like that. Like, I would always, like, jam it up until Liquid Fire, and then I would kind of stop, and then I would just listen to a couple songs individually, and that'd be about it. Of all of Gojira's records, too, this is probably the one I have revisited the least alongside The Link. And I would probably pick The Link still over this, because I feel like that is just consistently a more enjoyable album. For this one, I'm feeling a pretty middle-of-the-road 3 out of 5. Not leaning towards a 2.5 out of 5 or a 3.5 out of 5. It's just a 3 out of 5. It's decent, it's well made, it's extremely well performed and produced, just not my cup of tea, I guess. It doesn't really thrill me or excite me the way that other albums we've talked about have done, and continue to do, frankly. Next up, we have Magma, released June 17th, 2016 via Roadrunner Records, and this one's kind of funky. This one's kind of weird. What I find fascinating about this album in retrospect was it was really popular at the time of its release. Like, it sold 500,000 records in the first few months of its release, and it was nominated for a bunch of Grammys. Best Metal Performance, Best Rock Album. It elevated Gojira's profile to a whole new fucking level, one that few other progressive death metal bands ever experienced, or let's be honest, ever will experience. You know, they went from doing club shows to doing arena shows with fucking Slipknot. How do I know? Because I went to one of those arena shows, and it kicked ass. There were a lot of people that hailed it one of the best rock or metal albums of that year, and many who later went on to name it one of the best rock or metal albums of that decade. But also, as time has gone on, it has grown to be somewhat divisive, and I've met more and more people who just aren't really vibing with Magma. People have suggested that Gojira kind of compromised a part of who they were. They lost a part of who they were. That they had been made too accessible, too soft, or whatever. That new influences from post-metal or more commercial-sounding stuff had, like, polluted them or whatever. I don't know, man. Here's what I know, though. I like this album. I like this album a lot. I know it's not the most popular one in the Gojira discography, but I personally think it's just really interesting. It is a way more introspective and personal record for Joe and Mario Duplantis, especially the album deals a lot with death, again, specifically with the death of their mother who passed away from cancer. They were feeling very sentimental, and they were scared, and they were in mourning, obviously. They were, you know, having trouble really opening themselves up. And Magma kind of deals with the process of bottling emotions and kind of dealing with death and loss and fear. The album does also play around with some more melancholic vibes and such. Like, it is a more dreary and soft and atmospheric kind of record, very reminiscent of post-rock and post-metal to a certain extent. This is definitely where we see the death metal side of Gojira pretty much completely removed from Gojira, aside from, like, maybe the odd guttural or scream here and there. But I don't feel like it's less brutal or less extreme because they sold out or whatever the fuck. It's because they were dealing with something difficult and they wanted to kind of deal with that in a different kind of way. It just took them in a completely different kind of direction. I think in a lot of ways this is a more honest record. It's one of Gojira's most expressive and most emotive in that regard. And I still think there's a lot of really interesting and, yes, even heavy music on here. The Cell and Silvera, for instance, are two of my favorite Gojira numbers. I love the Shooting Star. I love the title track, Lowlands. I think there's a lot of really strong material on here. It is motivated more so than any other Gojira album entirely by some very complicated emotions, and I think that makes it a very endearing record and a very relatable record. I love it. Honestly, solid 4 out of 5 for me. I think it's great. I do not understand the now lukewarm and slightly negative reaction to this. I think it's great. I really do. I don't know. I mean, if this doesn't do it for you, then it doesn't do it for you. But, like, whatever. If this is what selling out sounds like, then fuck it. Gojira's sold out, and I'm fucking fine with that. I don't give a shit. It's a great album. That's what matters, to me at least. Besides, if we're gonna make the Gojira sold out argument, then a more compelling argument would be 2021's Fortitude, released on April 20th, 2021, obviously via Roadrunner Records. Let's make something very clear here. This is Gojira actively simplifying and streamlining their sound into something much more commercial and accessible. That's not to say that it's automatically bad. I'm just pointing this out because that's what Gojira did. This has been compared a lot to the Black Album from Metallica, which similarly saw Metallica simplifying and streamlining their sound for a larger audience. To be fair, a lot of metal albums over the years have been compared to the Black Album, and a lot of bands have wanted their works associated with the Black Album because, you know, contrary to what elitists would like to think, the Black Album was a pretty big fucking hit. But this is the only time I've heard that comparison and gone, yeah, that makes sense. Because, like, it still is Gojira in the same way that Black Album is still Metallica, just different. You know, there's no overarching concept per se. The songs are more episodic. They're similar to what Rush were doing in the early to mid 80s in that regard, or similar to what Mastodon were doing starting in the early 2000s with records like The Hunter and Once More Around the Sun. Everything was a little bit more self-contained, everything was a little bit more accessible, there were more hooks, and, you know, the heavier and more uncompromising and extreme aspects of the sound were mostly put to the side. At first, this had me concerned. I remember being not at all crazy pumped for a lot of the promo singles that were coming out, but, you know, I have to admit, when the album finally did come out, I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I think that it's really well done. It's Gojira doing mainstream radio metal, but still sounding like Gojira and still kicking a pretty decent amount of ass. Like Born for One Thing, Into the Storm, The Trails, Sphinx, Fortitude, these are all really solid numbers. I honestly love Amazonia too. I don't care if it's literally just Gojira's ripoff of fucking Roots from Sepultura. It's fun. I love the jaw harp. I love those bouncy, groovy vibes and beats. It's just a really cool, fun number. And it shows a little bit of the urgency that we still know from and expect from Gojira, you know? Like, it's from Mars to Sirius and The Way of All Flesh, and those concepts and ideas just kind of compacted into something that the average person might kind of sort of enjoy, or at least tolerate. Yeah, once again, if this is Gojira selling out, then fuck it. I guess I'm fine with Gojira selling out. I don't give a shit. It's a good album. I would say that Magma is stronger than Fortitude, but I would still give this a solid 3.5 out of 5. I think that's what we gave it when we reviewed it here a year ago. I don't remember off the top of my head. I do know that now I would give it a solid 3.5 out of 5. I think it's fun. I think it's a cool gateway album for people who want to learn more about more progressive and extreme styles of music without getting into, you know, like, I don't know, fucking Decapitated or Ne Obliviscaris or some shit like that. It still deals with a lot of cool issues, and it's just a really well-made album. And booyah! Reviewing every Gojira album. Hell yes. How would you rank every album in their discography? What would you give each album? How would you rate every individual album? What's your favorite Gojira album? What's your least favorite Gojira album? What are your favorite Gojira songs? I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. Tell me. It's your turn. In the comments below. Look, another video. Wow. Look, another video. Wow. Look, you can subscribe if you press this thing. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.